Snow was falling thick and fast. An elderly woman living alone discovered 3 nearly frozen golden retriever puppies at her doorstep. But as she gently dried their soaked fur, a chilling detail emerged. Each wore a handmade collar stitched with a number, 4, 5, and 6. So where were puppies 1, 2, and 3? And who was behind this cruel game? Before you hear the full story, take a guess. Will she save them all, or become the next target herself? The wind howled through the crooked alleyways of Juneau's worn-out southern district, where the forest pressed tightly against the last line of weather-beaten houses. Snow was falling hard, slanting sideways in the icy wind, coating every surface in a layer of silence and sorrow. It was just past dawn, though no sun had broken through the thick, slate-colored clouds. The world was painted in white and gray. Martha Ellis sat in her rickety kitchen, cradling a cup of watery oatmeal in her trembling hands. The single window facing the back lot had long since cracked across its edge, and every breath of wind seemed to crawl in through it like an unwanted guest. Her hands, knotted by arthritis and cold, struggled to hold the spoon steady. Yet she did not complain. She never did. Complaints were for people who believed someone would listen. At 60 years old, Martha had the bearing of someone who had not only outlived her joys, but buried them. She was small-boned, thin, with sharp cheeks and long strands of silver hair tied into a dull braid. Her eyes were pale blue and tired, but not hollow. Beneath the fatigue, they still held a quiet fire, the same fire that had once made her daughter Natalie laugh and call her lion-hearted. But Natalie was gone now. 15 years, a frozen highway, a single call in the night. The days had folded in since then, one into the next, like pages of a book never finished. No visitors, no holidays. Just the wind, the stove, and the bitter smell of old paperbacks that lined her walls. That morning, as the storm deepened, Martha rose to bring in the firewood before it disappeared completely beneath the snowdrifts. She opened her back door with effort, bracing against the bite of wind that tore through her shawl and brought tears to her eyes. The cold stung her lungs as she stepped outside, boots crunching through the powder. She moved slowly, careful on the slick porch steps. But then she froze. A sound, barely audible through the howl of wind. Like a squeak. A sob. It wasn't human. Too soft. Too fractured. She turned her head toward the chain-link fence that separated her small yard from the overgrown lot beyond. There, huddled against the metal, were 3 small forms, pressed close together, barely upright. 3 golden puppies, no more than 2 months old. Their tiny bodies leaned against the fence for support, as though it were the only thing keeping them from collapsing. Snow clung to their soaked fur, and their eyes, glassy, wide, almost pleading, met hers just as one let out a pitiful whimper, so faint she wasn't sure it had really happened. The smallest one's legs trembled, then gave out, and he slumped sideways into the snow, the others following in a slow, tragic tangle. Something inside her snapped. She dropped the firewood with a cry and rushed forward, nearly stumbling as she trudged through the deepening snow. Her boots sank halfway to the knee. Her heart pounded in panic. "No, no, not like this," she whispered through chattering teeth, tears blurring her vision. She reached them and immediately dropped to her knees, ignoring the wet cold that soaked into her skirt. One pup was barely breathing, its tiny ribcage rising in fragile, broken rhythm. The second had frost clinging to its ears and nose. The third wasn't moving at all. With surprising strength, Martha scooped all 3 into her arms and rose. Their bodies were so light, too light. She pressed them close to her chest, trying to share what little warmth her own shivering frame could offer, and half ran, half stumbled back to the house. Inside, she slammed the door shut with her heel and dropped to the floor beside the gas heater. She wrapped the puppies in the quilt that had once belonged to Natalie, the last thing in the house that still smelled like memory and warmth. She turned the heater up as high as it would go and hurried to boil water, fill bowls, and fetch a towel. Her fingers were shaking too badly to hold the scissors steady as she cut strips of cloth to wrap around the worst of the frostbite. The smallest pup, the one that had collapsed first, had a wound on his leg. Not torn, not natural, a clean cut. About an inch long, scabbed in part but raw at the edges, as if made intentionally. She sat back, heart hammering. Her eyes traveled over their bodies. They were thin, but not starved. Not completely. Their pads were sore, not shredded. Someone had cared for them. Until they didn't. Martha pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "Where did you come from?" she whispered. None of the houses around hers had dogs. She would have known. She knew too much about silence not to notice the absence of noise. The puppies stirred slightly under the quilt. The middle one, a bright golden female with a faint pink nose, licked her fingers as if in thanks. A small, wet gesture that made something inside Martha ache. She hadn't felt needed in years. Not truly, not since Natalie's last breath. She stayed with them through the storm, fed them milk drop by drop, massaged their paws, murmured lullabies she hadn't sung since Natalie was small. As she worked, her mind wandered unwillingly to the possibility that they weren't abandoned by accident, that they had been left to die on purpose. And that cut on the smallest one's leg. She couldn't stop seeing it. The heater buzzed softly and snow piled up against the windows. Outside, the world remained cold and cruel, but in this small, tattered house, warmth flickered again. Barely. But it was enough. As night fell, Martha looked down at the sleeping puppies. All three breathed now, slow and steady. She rested her hand over them and closed her eyes. "You're safe now," she whispered, voice cracking, "at least for tonight." What she didn't know, what she couldn't yet imagine, was that these tiny creatures had come with a question stitched into their fate. And soon, she would be the one forced to answer it. By morning, the storm had quieted, leaving behind a still white silence that blanketed the neighborhood in an eerie calm. Snow was piled knee-high on the edges of Martha's property, and the trees stood heavy with ice, their branches bowed like weary soldiers. Inside the dim living room, the gas heater hummed faintly, warming the small space where three golden puppies now slept nestled beneath Natalie's old quilt. A soft, rhythmic breathing came from them, fragile but steady, and Martha sat nearby in a sagging armchair, holding a lukewarm cup of tea in both hands, her fingers still trembling from the night before. She had barely slept. Her body ached, not just from age, but from tension that hadn't eased since she dragged the pups out of the snow. Her eyes kept returning to them, as though expecting them to disappear if she looked away too long. She knew the storm hadn't just dropped them on her doorstep like some miracle. Someone had left them there. Someone had wanted them to die. As the light outside shifted to a pale silver morning, Martha decided it was time to clean them properly. She gathered a basin of warm water, an old toothbrush, and the only bottle of gentle dish soap she still had in the cupboard. One by one, she lifted the puppies from the quilt and began to scrub gently, removing the clumps of ice, dirt, and dried blood from their fur. It was while brushing the second pup's neck, a medium-sized male with creamy fur and intelligent amber eyes, that she noticed something odd. Beneath the dirt, partially hidden under matted hair, was a faded piece of cloth. She paused, gently pushing the fur aside. It was a collar, a homemade one, fashioned from a strip of denim with clumsy stitching along the edge. Her breath caught. On the outer side of the collar, in uneven red thread, someone had hand-stitched the number 5. She blinked hard. Her fingers moved with purpose now, inspecting the other two pups. The smallest one, the one with the leg wound, had a collar as well, dull green with the number 6, and the third, the golden-furred female with the softest eyes, had a nearly unraveling strip of yellow cloth bearing the number 4. 4, 5, 6. Martha stared at the numbers for a long time, her heartbeat slowing, then quickening again with dread. It was deliberate. It had to be. These weren't just random dogs. Someone had marked them. And if these were numbers 4, 5, and 6, then what happened to 1, 2, and 3? Her stomach turned. She sat back on the floor, the towel in her hand falling limp. That same morning, she bundled the puppies into a canvas laundry basket lined with towels and carried them to the only place she could think of, Fairview Animal Clinic, about a half-hour walk down the snowy sidewalk. The basket was heavy and the path icy, but she took her time, pausing when her knees hurt too badly, keeping the edge of her coat pulled over the puppies to block the wind. People passed her, most of them in cars, but no one stopped. They never did. The clinic was a one-story building nestled between a shuttered gas station and a church thrift store. Its faded sign, partially buried in snow, read, "Fairview Animal Clinic. Kindness is medicine." Inside, it was warm, filled with the scent of antiseptic and kibble. The bell above the door jingled as she entered, and a woman behind the desk looked up with surprise. The woman was young, maybe in her early 20s, with olive skin, dark eyebrows, and a messy ponytail that suggested she'd been working since sunrise. Her name tag read, Lily Mendez. Lily stood quickly when she saw the basket. "Oh my God, are those puppies?" Martha nodded, setting the basket gently on the counter. "I found them in the snow last night. They were almost gone." Lily leaned over, inspecting them carefully. Her voice softened as she reached in to gently stroke the smallest one's paw. "They're golden retrievers, about 8 weeks maybe. Poor babies." Then her expression shifted as she examined the makeshift collars. "Wait, these collars." Martha watched her carefully. "Do they mean something to you?" Lily's brows furrowed. She pulled out her phone from her coat pocket and tapped rapidly. 2 weeks ago, someone dropped off a pair of mixed-breed puppies. They were barely alive. They had collars like these, homemade with numbers stitched in. I didn't think much of it then, but one had the number 2. Martha felt the chill creep back into her bones. "And the other?" "Number 3. Lily looked up slowly. "We thought maybe they were just litter markings, like someone keeping track of a big batch. But they both had strange injuries. One had cigarette burns, the other had a leg broken and splinted with electrical tape." Martha's face went pale. "Wait here," Lily said, hurrying to the back. A few minutes later, she returned with a folder containing pictures and notes. She showed Martha the photos. 2 puppies, one with a burned paw and sad, distant eyes. The other looked terrified, hiding under a towel. "We rehomed them with a foster last week, but we never found who did it." Martha's hands tightened around her bag. "That means there's at least a number 1. Lily nodded grimly. "And whoever had them, they're doing something twisted." For a moment, neither woman spoke. Outside, a plow scraped down the road, throwing slush up into the curbside snowbanks. Inside, the heater hummed, oblivious to the fact that something deeply wrong had started to emerge. "I can examine them all if you'd like," Lily offered gently. "We don't charge for foundlings. I'll keep notes. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find a pattern." Martha hesitated, then nodded. "Please, but I don't want to leave them. I want to stay while you do." Lily smiled softly. "Of course." And so, in a quiet examination room filled with charts and dog toys, Martha sat as Lily checked each pup, logging their condition, measuring their weight, noting the healing wound on number 6, the malnourishment of number 5, and the odd bruises on number 4's ribs. It was all too much for coincidence. Someone had hurt these animals systematically, tracked them, discarded them, and Martha, by accident or fate, had become their line of defense. When the exams were done, Martha wrapped the pups again in Natalie's quilt and placed them back into the basket. As she reached the door, Lily called out softly, "If you need anything at all, let me know. We get whispers sometimes, you know, from people too afraid to talk loud." Martha looked back at her. "I'll be listening now." And with that, she stepped back into the snow. Evening settled slowly over Juneau, casting long shadows across snow-covered rooftops. Martha Ellis stood at the kitchen counter, carefully stirring a bowl of softened kibble mixed with warm goat's milk. The puppies were beginning to eat on their own, though shakily. Number 4, the soft-eyed female, lapped at the mixture delicately. Number 5 wagged his tail faintly at the smell, while number 6, still limping from the wound, had begun to show flickers of curiosity. Their fragile recovery gave Martha something she hadn't felt in years. A purpose, quiet but undeniable. Lily Mendez returned that evening with a small camera, a used tripod, and her beat-up laptop wrapped in a blanket. Her coat was dusted with snow, cheeks red from the walk, but her eyes were sharp with intent. "I thought we could take proper photos," she said, setting up near the window where the light was best. "Good lighting makes a big difference for rescue posts. Sometimes people scroll past a blurry photo, but a sharp image, it makes them stop." Lily crouched to adjust the angle, while Martha gently coaxed the puppies into view. The younger woman worked quickly but with care, brushing snow off her camera lens, murmuring to the pups as she clicked. Each shot captured the bruised hope in their expressions, the fear that hadn't yet healed from their bones. After uploading the images and drafting a compassionate but cautious post, Lily showed Martha the screen. I kept the text simple, no mention of the numbered collars, just that they were found in distress and need fosters or adopters, she explained. I posted it to a few rescue groups, and I'll put it on the clinic's page too. Martha nodded, her hands resting lightly on the back of Lily's chair. Let's hope someone kind sees it. But kindness, it seemed, wasn't the first to respond. That night, long after Lily had gone and the puppies were asleep, Martha's landline rang. She startled. The phone rarely rang anymore. The old handset crackled as she lifted it. Silence, then a click, followed by a low hum. She hung up slowly, unease settling deep in her chest. She glanced at the puppies, still curled in their blanket. Everything felt suddenly too quiet, too still. At midnight, her cell phone buzzed. A text message lit the screen. She hadn't given this number out in years, except to Lily in the pharmacy. Stop looking. Don't ask about 1, 2, 3. Stay quiet if you want 4, 5, 6 to live. No signature, no callback number. Just cold, blunt words. She stared at the screen for several minutes before setting the phone down, fingers trembling. She didn't reply. At 8 a.m., Martha called Lily. They've found us, she said simply. Lily sounded groggy, but alert. What do you mean? Martha read her the message. There was a long pause. Let me check the posts. 10 minutes later, Lily called back, her voice tight. The post on the clinic's page is gone. My admin access has been revoked. I tried logging into my rescue account. It's suspended for suspicious activity. I never even got a warning. Martha's voice was quiet. They knew. The second it went up. Lily cursed softly under her breath, then took a breath to collect herself. I'm coming over. Don't go outside. Don't open the door unless it's me. Martha didn't ask why. She just hung up and double-checked the locks. Half an hour later, Lily arrived with a second laptop and a folder of printed documents, notes, records of reports filed by other rescues, and a copy of the photo she had taken the night before. She tossed her gloves on the counter and rubbed warmth back into her hands before she spoke. There's a pattern, she said. I've found reports from other small towns. Puppies showing up with numbered collars, some with injuries. Not just here, Ketchikan, Sitka, even a case in Haines. Same breed types too, Goldens, Shepherds, Labs, the more desirable ones. Martha looked up. What does that mean? Lily exhaled. It means this might not be some backyard abuser. It might be larger, a system. Breeders who discard weak puppies, or maybe worse, someone testing something. But we're not guessing anymore. We're documenting. She opened a shared document and began entering notes. The condition of the puppies, their weights, markings, collar materials, colors, even the stitching styles. All this can be cross-referenced later, she said. If we collect enough details, we might find a trail. Later that day, Martha decided to print out the photos and documentation herself. She visited the library at the edge of town, a small building with a flickering neon open sign and an aging librarian named Clara, a short woman with thinning white hair and a voice like dry leaves. Clara handed her a computer terminal number and a time slot without fuss. At the terminal, Martha uploaded the photos, printed out each image and page of information Lily had sent her, and stored them in a manila folder marked in pencil. Puppies. 456. She left with the folder clutched tightly to her chest like a sacred object. On her way out, she noticed a man leaning against a nearby lamppost. Middle-aged, stocky, with short blonde hair and a navy pea coat. He wasn't doing anything. Not reading, not talking, just staring vaguely toward the street. She walked past him with the folder under her arm, not looking up. That night, when she returned home, there was a single white envelope slipped under her front door. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. No writing. Just the faint scent of motor oil and dog fur. She burned it in the sink. The days grew colder. By the fourth morning since the storm, the snow had hardened into sharp ridges along the sidewalk, and the chill in the air no longer felt gentle. It bit, crept under coats and into bones. Martha had started layering old clothes, 3 sweaters and her late husband's wool scarf, just to keep warm in the mornings. But it wasn't the temperature that bothered her. It was the way the quiet had changed. There were subtle shifts, a neighbor's porch light left on too late, footprints in the snow outside her fence that didn't match her boots or Lily's. But Martha had lived too long in silence to dismiss what she sensed now. Someone was watching. She didn't mention it to Lily right away. The younger woman had enough to deal with. Since their social media post had been erased and Martha received the anonymous warning, they'd both begun acting more carefully. Lily no longer posted anything directly. Instead, she quietly emailed private networks of trusted rescue workers using coded language, always encrypting details. Martha, meanwhile, began keeping a notebook. She logged everything: the dog's behavior, sounds outside at night, any unusual visitors on the street. On the 5th day, she noticed a truck. It was early evening, the sky already dark, and she was walking the puppies in the backyard, a small fenced space where snow had been cleared just enough for them to explore. Number 6, though still limping, had taken to sniffing at the shrubs, while Number 4 clung to Martha's boot. Number 5 darted about in short bursts of energy, always returning to the others. That's when she heard the engine. It was low and rumbling, an uneven mechanical throb that didn't match the polished hum of any neighborhood cars. Martha turned and saw it through the fence slats. A gray pickup truck, or older model. Paint dulled and chipped. The windows were tinted. It rolled slowly past her home, too slow for someone just passing through. There were no plates. Martha felt her heart quicken. She scooped up the puppies, rushed inside, and peered through the side curtain. The truck had parked 2 houses down, engine idling. A man stepped out. He was tall, lean but sturdy, dressed in a thick black jacket and work boots. His face was partially obscured by a dark wool cap and a collar pulled high over his jaw, but Martha could still make out the square set of his chin, the heavy lines along his forehead, and the way he moved, deliberate, controlled, like someone used to physical labor. On his hands were thick brown gloves, the kind utility workers wore in the cold. He didn't knock on any doors. Instead, he walked slowly along the sidewalk, stopping in front of Martha's house. He didn't approach the door. He didn't even glance around. He simply looked, directly at the window. Martha froze, her breath caught in her throat. She remained still, barely daring to move the curtain an inch. Her eyes dropped to the puppies. Number 6 was trembling. The little pup backed into the corner under the couch, his tail tucked so tightly it was nearly invisible, teeth bared in silent fear. He didn't bark, not at first, just whimpered low. Then, with sudden force, he let out a single frantic bark, followed by a snarl so small it was almost pitiful. The other 2 puppies huddled together, but Number 6 seemed almost possessed by panic. He scrambled, tail down, and wedged himself behind Martha's coat rack. The man outside didn't flinch. After a few more seconds, he turned and walked back to his truck, got in, and drove away. Martha didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she didn't call Lily. She wanted proof first. She waited until the afternoon and made tea like normal. She fed the puppies and checked their bandages. Then, at precisely 4:30, she sat at the window with her old digital camera, a small silver device Natalie had once bought her for capturing butterflies in the garden. It hadn't worked well in years, but it still clicked, still focused, shakily. At 4:57, the truck returned. It rolled past again, same speed, same sound. This time it didn't stop, but she managed to lift the camera, steady it with both hands, and click. She captured a blurred image. Gray metal, partial side panel, a faint glimpse of the windshield and the corner of a sticker on the bumper. No license plate was visible. Still, it was something. That evening, Lily came by. Martha showed her the photo, her expression tight. "Do you know anyone who could enhance this?" Lily nodded, already pulling out her phone. "I know someone who works at the post office, sorting center in downtown Juneau. Her name's Natalie Hart, no relation. She sees a lot of delivery trucks and industrial vehicles. If anyone recognizes this truck, it's her." Lily texted the image with a brief note. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. She read the message, frowned, then passed it to Martha. "That looks like Carl Brunner's truck. Used to deliver for Arctic Lumber. Retired last year after a hand injury. Keeps to himself. Bit odd, lives out near the old ice quarry." Martha asked quietly, "What kind of odd?" Lily looked up, uncertain. "Said he had a lot of dogs, never let anyone close to his property." Number 6 whimpered from his blanket nest. The morning after the photo was sent to Lily's contact, a strange calm settled over the house. The gray truck hadn't returned. No messages, no phone calls, no more footprints in the snow. The silence, however, wasn't comforting. It was the kind of quiet that comes just before something breaks. And in that silence, the past began to creep in. Martha Ellis stood at the kitchen sink, her hands soaked in warm water, rinsing the puppy's food bowls. Her fingers, reddened from age and cold, moved slowly, deliberately. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the clock above the stove and the occasional sound of a pup snuffling from under the couch. Number 6 still avoided open spaces. Number 4 had begun chewing Martha's shoelaces, while number 5, the most outgoing, was currently curled at her feet, fast asleep. She looked down at him with a kind of wonder she hadn't let herself feel in years. She hadn't meant to care this deeply. At first, it was just instinct. Get them warm, keep them fed, make sure they didn't die. But somewhere in the middle of warming milk and wrapping sore paws, something inside her had begun to shift. It was subtle at first. The way she hummed without thinking while brushing their fur, or how she paused to take photos with her old camera just to remember how small they were. Then last night, when she couldn't sleep, she opened the top drawer of her dresser, the one she hadn't touched in 15 years. Inside was Natalie's baby album. The leather was cracked at the corners, the binding loose. She ran her hand over the cover for a moment before opening it. Photos spilled out. A newborn swaddled in blue, a toddler with curly auburn hair sitting on a beach towel, a young girl hugging a stuffed dog named Samson. Natalie's eyes in every photo were wide, unafraid, full of possibility. Martha remembered how her daughter used to fill the house with noise, singing, laughing, making up ridiculous stories with animal voices. The silence that followed her death was worse than grief. It was annihilation. The night Natalie died, the police called it an accident. They said the brakes failed, that she hit a patch of ice. But Martha had seen the bruises on her daughter's arms at the funeral. She had seen the fear in Natalie's eyes for weeks leading up to it, the way she would jump at loud knocks or check the locks twice before bed. Martha begged the officers to re-examine the case. They dismissed her. No evidence. No proof. Only a grieving woman grasping for answers that weren't there. That was the day Martha stopped believing in the system, the day she stopped trying to be heard. Now, 15 years later, she was watching number 5 sleep against her foot and feeling something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since, a flicker of maternal warmth, and it scared her. She set the bowls on the rack to dry and walked slowly to the living room. Number 4 followed, tail wagging. She turned on the TV, a quiet habit she had picked up since Lily suggested they listen for local reports. A documentary was playing, something about stray animals in urban cities. The images were harsh. Dogs crammed into metal cages, barking wildly, their fur matted, eyes wild. The camera panned across rows of caged animals, the clinking of metal loud and unsettling. That was when it happened. Number 5, still lying beside the heater, jolted upright. His eyes locked onto the screen. His body stiffened. And then he let out a sharp, panicked bark that startled both Martha and the other pups. He scrambled to his feet, began circling the room, whining, bumping into the table legs and barking again. This time frantic, almost pleading. Martha rushed to him, kneeling slowly. "What is it, sweetheart?" He kept barking at the screen, now showing handlers dragging the cages with dogs inside. The clinking noise made him flinch. Martha turned off the TV. It took nearly 10 minutes to calm him down. She held him close, wrapping him in Natalie's quilt, gently stroking his back. His heart was racing so fast, she could feel it hammering against her chest. "They kept you in a cage, didn't they?" she whispered. "All of you." She looked over at the others. Number 4 was hiding under the armchair, and number 6 had vanished behind the kitchen door. None of them liked the sound of metal. These puppies hadn't been dumped. They had escaped something, or someone let them go. That night, Martha sat in her armchair holding a small journal. She hadn't written anything in years, but the words came slowly, hesitantly. They are not just strays, they are survivors, and they are terrified of something I haven't seen yet. Natalie would have known what to do. She always did. Maybe I still can. Maybe it's not too late to be a mother again. Not in the way I used to be, but in a way that matters now. She closed the journal, her eyes misty, but not broken. Outside, the wind picked up again. A sound like footsteps crunched across the front porch and faded. Martha didn't move. She just held number 5 a little closer. The storm had returned, sweeping through Juneau with a fury that painted the streets in blinding white. The air was bitter and unforgiving, and gusts of wind slammed against Martha Ellis's windows as if demanding to be let in. Inside, the house was dim and still. The puppies huddled beneath layers of blankets by the heater, the warmth barely cutting through the chill. Number 6 whimpered in his sleep, legs twitching. Martha watched him from the armchair, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. It was past midnight when the knock came. Not a tap, a hard, urgent knock. 3 times, then silence. Martha stiffened. She stood slowly, careful not to wake the puppies, and moved toward the door. She didn't turn on the porch light. Instead, she stood behind the curtain, peering through the narrow slit of fabric. A figure stood in the snow, hunched and shivering. He looked young, early 20s perhaps. He wore a faded army surplus jacket, dark jeans soaked to the knees, and a knit beanie pulled low. His hands were bare and red, clasped tightly around something. His breath steamed in the cold, his shoulders shaking either from the wind or something deeper. Martha opened the door just enough to speak through the crack. "Who are you?" He looked up sharply, startled. His eyes were wide and raw, hazel with specks of green. His face was pale, sharply drawn, with a jaw still soft from youth, but marked with stubble and fatigue. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quickly. "Please, I couldn't take it anymore." Martha's heart thudded in her chest. Take what? He stepped forward, not crossing the threshold, and held out a folded piece of paper. It was damp from the snow, the ink running at the edges. "I worked there," he said. "I thought it was a rescue place. I didn't know at first. Then I couldn't get out. They threatened me." Martha took the paper, her hands trembling. "Where?" "An old property off Dalton Hill, just outside town. There's a back entrance. They kept them there, in cages, small ones, puppies, pregnant mothers. If they didn't behave..." His voice broke and he looked down. "I only got 3 out. I waited until they weren't watching. Left them near the fence in the snow. I thought someone would find them." Martha's eyes widened. 4, 5, and 6? He nodded. "I didn't know their numbers. I just wanted them to live." She stepped forward, touched his arm gently. "What's your name?" The young man hesitated. "Tyler." Before she could ask more, he stepped back. "I have to go. If they know I talked to anyone..." "I can protect you," Martha said. "No one can," Tyler whispered, then turned and ran into the night. Martha stood in the open doorway long after he vanished into the storm. The paper he had given her trembled in her grip. On it, in smeared blue ink, were just a few desperate words. "Old Trembley Farm, behind silo. Look under tarp. I'm sorry." She closed the door, locked it twice, and went straight to the phone. The next morning, Lily arrived just as the sun began to rise. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was tucked hastily into a wool beanie. She wore a heavy coat and had a pair of gloves clutched in her pocket. "You sure about this?" she asked, as Martha handed her the note. "As sure as I am that those dogs were meant to die," Martha replied. Lily nodded once, then pulled out her phone. "I know someone who can help." An hour later, the knock on the door was lighter, familiar. Martha opened it to find a tall man with weathered features standing on the porch. He was in his mid-40s, lean but strong, with a worn officer's jacket under a navy blue parka. His beard was trimmed but uneven, and his eyes, steel gray, tired, lit up slightly when he saw Martha. "Mrs. Ellis," he said warmly. "It's been a long time." She offered a faint smile. "Hello, Dean." Dean Hale had been Natalie's childhood friend. They'd grown up together, lost touch during college, and reconnected briefly during the investigation into her death. Afterward, he had joined the police force and moved into rural law enforcement, rarely seen in the city. He stepped inside, scanning the room. His posture was relaxed but alert, the kind of presence that held respect without asking for it. "I heard about what's going on," he said, his voice low. "Lily called me last night, said you might need backup." Martha handed him the note. He read it silently, then looked up. "Trembley Farm was abandoned years ago. Family moved out after the barn collapsed. It's been off-grid since. No one pays taxes on it anymore." "But someone's there now," Martha said, "and dogs are suffering." Dean studied her for a long moment. You really think this lead is real? I know it is. He nodded. Then we go. But carefully. They left the puppies with Clara, the local librarian, and part-time dog Foster. Clara was in her 60s, a wiry woman with white hair twisted into a tight bun, and a voice that always sounded slightly unimpressed, but her kindness was real, and her hands were gentle as she took the pups into her care. Don't worry, she said, adjusting her thick glasses. I'll keep them safe. You just do what you have to do. By late afternoon, the snow had eased into flurries. The road to Tremblay Farm was narrow, half frozen, lined with birch trees that stood like silent witnesses. Dean drove a city-owned SUV while Martha and Lily sat in the back, the atmosphere tense. The farm came into view slowly, a leaning wooden silo, a sagging barn half covered in snow, a rickety house with no lights. The land around it was overgrown, fences broken or missing entirely. It looked deserted. They parked behind a grove of trees and approached on foot. Dean carried a flashlight and a compact sidearm. Lily had a small camera, and Martha held nothing but her determination. They followed the note's directions, circling behind the silo. There, beneath a tarp half covered in snow, was a hatch door, wooden, reinforced with old chain loops. Dean knelt, tested the handle. Not locked. He opened it slowly, revealing a set of stairs descending into darkness. From below, faint sounds echoed up. Soft, rhythmic thuds. Movement. Lily turned on her camera. Martha took a deep breath. Then they went down. The steps leading into the underground chamber were narrow and slick with frost, each footfall muffled by the heavy silence that surrounded them. The light from Dean's flashlight cut through the dark and narrow swaths, bouncing off rusted pipes and sagging wooden beams. The air was different down here, thick, stale, and saturated with the faint smell of bleach and decay. Martha felt her lungs tighten with every step, her grip tightening around the banister as she descended behind Dean and Lily, the cold seeping through her gloves. The space at the bottom of the stairs opened into a long corridor lined with half-rotted crates and metal shelves. Scraps of fabric, empty water dishes, and clumps of fur littered the ground. Lily turned on her camera light, the harsh beam revealing old newspaper sheets stuck to the concrete floor, smudged with something dark that had dried long ago. A few had paw prints embedded in the stains. Dean moved slowly, methodically checking each doorway as they passed. His expression had shifted into that of a man who'd seen too many broken things. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowed, the years on the force showing in the way he held his breath before each push of a door. They came to a steel hatch partially buried in the ice-covered wall. It looked like it had once been a meat locker. The air was colder here, the frost thick on the hinges. A faint sound echoed from within, soft, muffled. Not a cry, not a growl, a bark, weak and desperate. Dean looked at Martha. "Stay behind me." He braced himself and heaved the hatch open. A burst of frigid air hit them, curling around their legs. The light revealed metal cages lining the walls of a walk-in freezer, most of them empty. A few still had dirty blankets, half-eaten kibble frozen in bowls. And at the far end of the room, inside the smallest cage, something moved. Lily gasped. "Oh my God!" A puppy, no more than 8 weeks old. Thin, trembling, golden fur matted and stained. One eye swollen shut, the other glassy, but alert. It lay on its side, barely moving, but its tail thumped weakly against the bars as they approached. Dean knelt quickly, pulling out bolt cutters from his bag and snapping the lock. He reached in gently and lifted the pup out, cradling it against his chest. "It's still alive," he said softly, barely. Martha looked down at the collar, a faded scrap of fabric, stained with blood. The number was barely visible, but it was there. 3. Martha's breath caught. "We found him!" Lily rushed forward with a thermal blanket, wrapping the puppy tightly. "We need to get him to the clinic, now." Dean didn't speak. He handed the dog to Lily, then turned back toward the freezer. Behind a toppled shelving unit, 2 more cages were stacked. Inside were the bodies of 2 other puppies, golden retrievers like the rest. Frozen solid, eyes closed, limbs stiff. There were no collars on them. Martha turned away, her stomach churning. Her hands shook as she leaned against the wall, but she didn't cry. Not yet. Dean's voice broke the silence. We have enough. This is a crime scene. They retraced their steps quickly, leaving the cold behind. Outside, the storm had returned, the wind howling like a warning. Lily carried the wounded pup close, tucked inside her coat. As they reached the SUV, Dean turned to Martha. I'll call it in from the station, full report, photos. We'll get warrants for the rest of the property. Martha nodded. Do you think they're still nearby? Dean's jaw tightened. No, this place was cleared days ago, maybe a week. They abandoned it, but not in a hurry. This was planned. Back in town, the puppy, number 3, was rushed into Fairview Clinic. Dr. Emmett Shaw, the head veterinarian, took one look and pulled out emergency supplies. Shaw was in his late 50s, tall and lean with snowy hair and a calm demeanor. His presence was steady, almost fatherly, as he worked in silence with Lily assisting. They gave fluids, warmth, pain medication. Martha sat in the corner, silent, her eyes locked on the tiny form fighting for breath. You brought him just in time, Shaw said. Another hour and he wouldn't have made it. Later, as Martha waited outside with Dean, he stood beside her on the frozen steps of the clinic, his breath visible in the air. I've seen a lot, he said. Meth labs, illegal weapons caches. But this is the first time I've seen people do this to dogs and hide it so well. They hid it by pretending to care, Martha replied. They called it rescue. Dean looked at her, and there was something pained in his expression. We'll find them. He meant it. But Martha also knew what the system was like. Slow, careful, afraid to accuse the wrong person. This would take time. But time was not something the remaining dogs might have. That evening, Martha returned home. The house was empty without the puppies, now in temporary care at Clara's. She walked through the rooms, picked up a chewed toy, folded the blanket number 6 had dragged behind him for days. She made herself tea, then sat in the living room and stared out the window. The snow was still falling, but tonight she felt something else stirring beneath it. Not fear, not grief, resolve. The trial was quiet, but the consequences were not. Within 3 weeks of the raid at Tremblay Farm, 4 arrests had been made, 2 men and 2 women, all connected to a shell nonprofit called Northern Companion Relief, an organization that had masqueraded for over a year as a rescue group. Their promotional materials were slick, their records doctored, their website filled with pictures of smiling volunteers and healthy dogs that had been stolen from legitimate shelters in other towns. It was Lily who testified first, presenting photos, adoption records, and communication threads that exposed how deep the operation had gone. Then came Dean, calm and measured, laying out the police's case in unshakable detail. Tyler, the young man who had brought the first confession to Martha's door, was offered protection in exchange for his full cooperation. His testimony gave investigators the missing puzzle pieces, routes, supply lines, names, and finally, there was Martha. She stood in the courtroom, dressed in a navy blue coat she hadn't worn since Natalie's funeral, her hair pinned back with quiet dignity. Her voice was low but unwavering as she spoke. She did not cry, but others did. When the judge closed the session, the words unlawful animal trafficking, felony abuse, and intentional neglect rang across every local paper for days. But Martha didn't read them. She had already returned home, to her creaky old house, the patched heater, the dented mugs. But things were different now. Hope was no longer an idea. It had a heartbeat, a name. Hope, the smallest of the 3 pups, had gone home with a family from Sitka, a mother named Rachel and her 9-year-old daughter, Elsie. Rachel was a former trauma nurse, lean and olive-skinned, with lines around her eyes and hands that moved carefully, like every touch mattered. Her daughter, all braces and wide eyes, had immediately hugged the pup and said, "She looks like a star." Martha had smiled, something loosening in her chest. Clover, the gentle one, had been adopted by a man named Theo, mid-30s, red-bearded, with a limp in one leg from a snowmobile accident. He ran a repair shop and had a reputation for talking to the engines like they were family. When he met Clover, he knelt, despite the pain in his knee, and whispered, "Let's be the quiet kind of friends." And then there was Rusty, the boldest of the trio, the survivor of the number 6 collar. Rusty had refused to be parted from Martha the day the adoptions began. He had followed her from room to room, curled beside her chair, barked at every stranger who stepped too close. He didn't sleep unless his back touched her leg. So she had made her choice. She filled out the paperwork herself, wrote Martha Ellis on the line that asked for primary owner, then paused, smiled faintly, and under home description, she wrote, warm enough. 1 week later, she was invited to speak at the local library during a youth outreach session. The idea had come from Clara, who said with dry frankness, "You're more useful than half the guests we bring in anyway." On the day of the event, Martha wore a fresh sweater, hair combed neatly, and Rusty trotted beside her on a bright red leash, wearing a tiny blue bandana with a sunflower print. The library meeting room was filled with folding chairs and mismatched mugs of hot cider. Teenagers, young adults, rescue volunteers, even 2 city council members had shown up. She didn't give a speech. She just told a story about 3 puppies in the snow, about the sound of a bark that wasn't meant to survive, about a woman who had stopped believing in the world until the world brought her a chance to believe in something smaller, warmer, and golden. By the time she finished, the room was quiet. A few were crying. One young man asked if he could volunteer at the shelter. Another asked how to report animal neglect if the police didn't listen. Martha stayed until the building closed, answering questions, hugging people she didn't know. That night, she sat on her porch with Rusty curled beside her. The storm had passed days ago, and the snow had begun to melt into soft slush. The wind was gentle for once, carrying the smell of pine and wood smoke, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the sun came out. It was thin, almost shy, but golden. It touched the trees, the fence, the old wooden steps. It glinted off Rusty's fur as he lifted his head to look at her. "You stayed," Martha whispered. "You were meant to stay." Rusty nuzzled against her knee, tail thumping. She looked out across the yard. The same yard where, weeks ago, she had found 3 nearly frozen pups barely clinging to life. Now, it was just a yard again. But to her, it would always be the place where she had started over. She didn't have a daughter anymore, but she had a story. And this time, the ending was hers to choose. Sometimes, the smallest cries, those hidden beneath the snow, behind a fence, inside a broken heart, are the ones heaven hears the loudest. Martha didn't go looking for a miracle. She didn't expect to find grace wrapped in frostbitten fur or love in the bark of a frightened puppy. But sometimes, God sends us what we need not through thunder or light, but through the quiet trembling of something we almost missed. If you've ever felt alone, forgotten, or afraid to hope again, remember Martha, and remember Rusty. They remind us that no matter how dark the storm, the sun still rises. Miracles are real, but sometimes they arrive on 4 tiny paws. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs light today. Tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a small miracle like this? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true, soul-stirring stories. And may God bless every heart that chooses compassion, even in the coldest of winters. From our hearts to yours, thank you for believing in second chances.